Officer Bradley Kane had worn the badge for 15 years, and though he was known around town for being strict, those who truly knew him also understood that his sternness often crossed into arrogance, and his arrogance often revealed the ugliness he kept buried deep, the belief that some people were beneath him simply because of the color of their skin. On a hot summer afternoon, with the city streets buzzing with vendors and families, Bradley stood outside a convenience store, sipping coffee and eyeing the passers-by with a sneer he didn't bother to hide, when a black woman in a sharp business suit stepped out of a sleek black car, her heels clicking on the pavement, her presence commanding in a way that turned heads, but not his respect. Instead, Bradley smirked and muttered under his breath, loud enough for his partner to hear, "Looks like someone's lost on their way to the hair salon," drawing a chuckle from the other officer. The woman ignored him at first, walking with dignity, but Bradley wasn't finished. He stepped in front of her path, pretending to check her bag, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he said, "What's the occasion? Job interview at the fast food joint down the street?" The crowd that had gathered looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke, and for a brief moment, the woman's eyes locked on his calm, steady, and unreadable, and in that silence, Bradley felt a flicker of something he didn't recognize unease. She didn't respond, didn't flinch, didn't rise to his mockery, only said in a voice low and measured, "You'll regret this," before walking past him as though his words had no weight. Bradley laughed it off, but as he turned back to his partner, that flicker of unease grew, though he couldn't explain why. That the next morning, Officer Bradley strolled into the precinct for roll call, coffee in one hand, swagger in his step, ready to start another day of patrol. The chatter among officers quieted as Captain Reynolds, the outgoing precinct chief, announced the arrival of their new commanding officer, someone appointed by the state to bring much-needed reform to a department that had grown infamous for complaints of misconduct. Bradley leaned against the wall, half listening, until the door opened and in walked the same black woman he had mocked just hours before. Her presence filled the room, her tailored suit crisp, her eyes sharp yet calm, and in an instant, Bradley felt his stomach drop as Captain Reynolds said, "Everyone, meet your new commanding officer, Chief Daniels." A hush fell over the room as she stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the gathered officers, landing briefly just long enough on Bradley. The memory of his own words from the day before rang in his ears like a gunshot, each syllable now a weight pulling him under. She began to speak, her tone firm yet measured, outlining her vision for accountability, respect, and change in the department, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had not just earned her place but fought for it. And Bradley could barely breathe as realization crashed over him. The woman he had mocked as lost and beneath him was now his boss, with power not just over his shift but over his career, his future, his entire reputation. He tried to avoid her gaze, but she didn't let him escape. At the end of the meeting, as the other officers filed out, she said his name calmly, clearly, and the room felt suddenly too small, the walls closing in as he turned to face the woman he had disrespected. In her new office, Chief Daniels gestured for Bradley to sit, but the chair felt more like a witness stand, and he sank into it with the awkwardness of a man stripped of his shield. She leaned against her desk, arms crossed, studying him not with anger, but with a measured patience that unnerved him more than shouting ever could. Finally, she spoke. "Officer Kane, yesterday you mocked me. You judged me based on nothing but the color of my skin and the assumptions you carry in your heart." Her words were calm, but they struck like blows, because Bradley had no defense, no excuse, no clever retort that would make what he had said disappear. He stammered, muttering that he hadn't meant it, that it was just a joke, but Daniels cut him off. "Racism is never a joke. Disrespect is never a joke. You wear a badge that demands integrity, yet you used it as a shield for arrogance." For the first time in years, Bradley felt exposed, the weight of his behavior pressing down until the coffee in his veins turned to ice. He expected her to fire him on the spot, to end his career with one stroke of her pen, but instead she leaned closer, her eyes unwavering. "I'm not going to ruin you today," she said, "but I am going to give you a choice. You can keep living as the man you've been, or you can become the officer this community needs. But understand this: if I ever see you mock, disrespect, or abuse someone under my command again, your badge will be gone before you can blink." Her words were not just a warning, but a lifeline, and Bradley, for the first time in years, felt shame wash over him so powerfully that it stripped away the bravado, leaving him silent, his head bowed. As the truth settled in, the woman he had tried to humiliate had shown him more mercy than he deserved, and the question now was whether he had the strength to change. Days turned into weeks, and under Chief Daniel's leadership, the precinct began to shift. Training sessions focused on empathy, respect, and community engagement. Old habits were challenged, and misconduct was no longer brushed under the rug. Bradley found himself at the center of this change, watched closely by both Daniels and his fellow officers. Every action weighed against his past arrogance. At first, he resisted, grumbling under his breath, but as he walked the streets of his patrol, he began to see the difference. A black shop owner he once ignored now greeted him cautiously. A mother whose son had been harassed by officers in the past eyed him warily, and Bradley realized how deep the wounds of mistrust ran. Slowly, he began to really listen to the people he had once dismissed, and the more he listened, the heavier his shame became. But also, strangely, the lighter his heart felt, as though shedding years of ignorance brick by brick. Chief Daniels never once softened her watchful gaze, but she gave him room to prove himself, and over time, Bradley found himself standing not as the arrogant officer mocking strangers, but as a man learning to serve with humility. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the city quieted, he found himself on patrol alongside Daniels, the silence between them heavy but not hostile. Finally, he said, voice low, "Chief, about that day, I was wrong. I was blind, but you didn't fire me. You gave me a chance to be better. I won't waste it." Daniels regarded him for a long moment before replying, "We'll see, Officer Kane. Change isn't about words, it's about action." And with that, she walked on, leaving him standing in the fading light, the weight of his past heavy, but no longer chains around his soul. For the first time, Bradley believed he could change, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And though the road ahead would be long, he would walk it one step at a time, knowing that sometimes the greatest lessons come not from those we mock, but from those strong enough to forgive us when we least deserve it. If this powerful story moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button to Powerful Life Stories. Every tale here carries lessons of justice, humility, and redemption that can change hearts and inspire minds. Don't just watch, join the journey. Subscribe now, because the next story might just change your life.